funny.
Yeah, here we go.
Sit up. Not slouch.
Welcome to In the Zone. I am Craig Zimmerman, and today we are here at number 53, and we welcome in Mr. Mark Eberhard. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Craig. Glad to be here.
So, Mark, you've been part of the St. Clair fabric for many, many years, and we'll go into that a little bit. But maybe for some of the kids, you know, you're a teacher in the school, and some of the kids might not know some of these things about where you were born and raised and so on. So tell us where you were born and raised.
I was born and raised in the city of Detroit,
Okay.
1962.
Okay.
Grew up east side. If you know Detroit, grew up around Indian Village, something called Berry Subdivision, Belle Isle.
Okay.
That was my area.
So you grew up in a, I'll call it the golden era, in a sense of the east side of Detroit from the standpoint of, before a lot of the growth, but you know, a good time in Detroit. What high school did you go to?
That was a decent time in Detroit. I think things are going better now, but ended up, went to an elementary school in Detroit. My father's a Lutheran minister for many years.
Yep.
And so we went to a Lutheran elementary school called Bethany, which is over on East Outer Drive in Detroit.
Okay.
And then went to a school called Lutheran East, which was at 8 and Kelly.
Okay.
Used to be the two Catholic high schools, Notre Dame,
Yep.
Regina, and then Lutheran East, and then on the back end was Harper Woods.
For all the people that don't know about that, that's right behind the former Eastland Mall.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you know, before the camera rolled, we talked a little bit about. I think I learned from you being on Paul Dingeman's show before that your father being involved in the church in the city, which was on Gratiot.
Correct.
What church was it again?
It was Historic Trinity Lutheran. Yeah, it's right near Eastern Market on Gratiot.
And it's one of the old.
And they've been there since 1840 something.
Yeah, yeah. And so for people that may not know, that was in the area where the Stroh Brewery, right down that area, right?
The Stroh Brewery was literally built right. The Stroh Brewery was literally in a U shape built around the church.
Yeah.
And when they did the demolition and imploded the Stroh's Brewery, they had to cover the church with plywood.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as it fell in, we didn't know whether it was going to fall into the church or not.
Right. I remember that. And now, since that was raised, the Stroh office buildings are around
Brewery Park there.
Yeah, Brewery Park. So what years was your father, hate to get back into this, but what years was your father the pastor of the church?
Well, he came from his father. My grandfather was a Lutheran minister in Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
Him and my mom came in 1959.
Okay.
And they went to a church called Riverside, which was on the Lower East Side. If you're familiar with the Rooster Tail and the Sinbad, somewhat in that area.
Yep. Yep.
And he got well known for his community work and his community activism, and that got him into politics in the Detroit City Council, which he was on for about 34 years. Anyway, long story, Riverside closed in the early 70s, and he went over and worked with Dr. Oddie, who was the pastor at Historic Trinity, and then eventually took over upon Dr. Oddie's retirement.
Okay, very, very interesting.
So he was there as the head pastor for about 35 years.
Okay, just a short period of time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and that was one of those churches that, again, I'm not going to pick a number, but I called on a lot of churches in my business of selling office copiers in the day, and I would say that Historic Trinity is one of a handful of churches that have been around in large congregations for generations.
Yeah.
Probably 8 or 10 of them like that around the city.
Yeah. When we first went over, it was on a little bit of hard times. It was only maybe regularly about 70 people.
Sure.
Now it's since he's passed, it's a very large congregation, very active.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me about growing up on the east side of Detroit then. You talked about your grade school. I know where that was.
Yeah.
I know where you went to high school by Eastland Mall. So do you have vivid memories of going to, say, back in the day down to the Hudson's?
Yep.
Okay.
I can remember Hudson's. It's getting a little foggy, but I can remember it, yeah. I mean, at Christmas time, there was always that floor you went up to, and they gave you money in an envelope, and you went and bought things for your siblings and your parents. And
So give me a little background, other siblings.
Yeah, I've got 4 brothers.
Okay.
I got an older brother, Mike, and then 3 younger brothers, Tim, Paul, and David.
Okay.
Tim teaches in Chicago. Paul is in construction, high up in the company he works for.
Okay.
My youngest brother, David, is a lawyer, and my oldest brother, he just changed jobs.
Okay.
And I don't remember who he works for.
Oh, no,
But he
that's
just
fine.
changed-
That's fine. So you come from a family of all boys.
Yes.
So you played a lot of street ball, baseball, basketball.
Yeah, we had
growing up?
down the only about 3 houses down. There was a park called Stockton Park,
Okay.
and so yeah, a lot of baseball. Summer, that's right where the hydroplane races are.
Yep.
So that was always a big thing in the summer. A lot of foul balls went into the mayor's backyard.
Okay.
But
The
they got to know us so we could go in and get what needed.
the famous Manugian Mansion.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. That's another one of those. That area I've only been in a couple times, but if I've always said about neighborhoods like that in Detroit. When you say Detroit and growing up in Detroit, a lot of people have a negative connotation to maybe some of the decay of Detroit.
Right.
But if I took somebody down there, blindfolded them, and then took the blindfold off, leading down that street, they would not think they're in Detroit. They might think they're in Grosse Pointe or even Royal Oak or something.
It's an old
like that.
historic
Yeah.
neighborhood. I mean, most of the houses were built in the 1910s.
Yeah. And big houses.
Just like Indian Village, and then if you start going to places like Palmer Park and
Yeah.
Boston Edison, it's a lot of that same old historic architecture.
And there's probably half a dozen, and maybe more than half a dozen, but like those names that you'll hear, that if you went down there and took some people that have never been down there to go, wow, I didn't know this even existed. And it's just as nice today as it was 50, 60 years ago.
There are nice sections, and fortunately, in my opinion, Detroit's making some real positive
comeback.
positive moves.
For sure. So from the east side of Detroit, where did you go to college?
Michigan State, Spartan through and through.
Okay.
So, yeah, I graduated from Michigan State in 1985. Ended up doing a lot of my master's work at Michigan State as well.
And what was your major in?
The major was in biology. Master's was in biology. I also ended up going, when was it? Early 2000s, 2000 to 2004, getting a theater's master's in theater directing at Roosevelt University, the College for Performing Arts of Chicago.
Okay.
So,
Quite a vast array of
always an interesting mix.
Yeah,
yes.
interesting mix. So you've taught at the high school since what year?
1986.
Okay. So you must be one of the longer tenured teachers at the high school.
Yeah. Pete Fox and myself are now the oldest and the longest.
Okay.
Yes.
You and Professor Pete.
Yes.
Okay. Are you and Pete going to go out at the same time?
We
Or you
always
got a
talked about it.
contest?
He's sticking to 40. I don't know if I can do 40. We'll see. I
Well-
think next year might be it for me.
In knowing Pete, he's probably got some ulterior motive of the dollars and cents with the pension program figured out, right?
Possibly.
Right.
Just because of the luck of the draw, I'm actually the top of the list, and he's number 2. I think he just wants to be top of the list.
Oh, there you go.
For a year at
I got to
least.
call Pete and then ask him about that. I said, "You're not number 1 yet, are you, Pete?" See what he says. So you come to St. Clair, you teach science, and you got involved in the theater program.
Yeah, so I actually coached first. I coached football with, at that time, Ben Vitakevich was the head coach.
Yep.
And so did football for about 20 years, worked with Pete a lot in football during those years. Also did wrestling for a couple years, and then did baseball for about 15 years when Rich Malowitz and Denny White were heading up the baseball program. And then somehow deviated off of that and got into theater. And really started with nothing. I mean, we had literally a bolt of muslin, that was it. And the old auditorium on 6th Street, which was pretty rugged.
Right.
And the community was kind enough to build that Performing Arts Center about 5-6 years down the road for us. And
So
it's been a lot of fun doing that.
so
That was
that-
28 years and 100 plus shows.
That certainly could be known as from the outhouse to the penthouse.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Big difference in facilities.
Yeah.
And then actually before I got into theater, I started up with the student leadership program and the student council, which I did for about 35 years. So beginning of this year, the decision was made to let some of those extracurriculars go.
Sure.
I kept trying to find someone to hand it off to,
Nobody's there.
Finally realized, unless I step out and
Right.
get out of the way,
Okay.
and people have stepped in.
That's
so,
good.
And, you know, they'll put their own fingerprints on it, and they'll give it their own look, and that'll
Sure.
be great. So.
Sure. Any children of the Eberhards?
We got 4.
Okay.
Our daughter Erin's the oldest. They all graduated from St. Clair High School.
Okay.
Erin's our oldest. She's earned her PhD at Michigan Tech in environmental science. Our oldest son, number 2, the first 2 graduated from University of Michigan. We forgive, but they graduated from University of Michigan.
Okay.
Eric is working a master's PhD at Columbia in New York in environmental science. Somehow they all ended up in environmental science. Ian, our third, graduated from Oakland University, and he's been out in California the last 4 years, working with the state, doing a lot of research in environmental science. So last summer he spent all summer diving off the coast of San Diego.
That's a
doing
tough life,
population
isn't it?
studies, yeah. And then our youngest, last one, finally graduated from Michigan State. Only one Spartan out of the 4.
Okay.
Graduated from Michigan State just this past April. In environmental science and public policy. So they're all doing quite well. They got the same stress as every other 20-year-old has.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
but
Okay.
they're all doing well. And
And where did you meet your boss?
actually, she taught and I taught at St. Clair High School.
Okay.
So she came 1 year after I did.
Okay.
And we took a trip we were supposed to go to Chicago with like 5 of us to see my brother and sister-in-law and just spend the weekend in Chicago. I think it was Memorial Day weekend, I think.
Okay.
Ended up, they canceled out, so it only ended up being the 2 of us that went. And the rest
Here
is
you are
history.
So many years later, right?
Yes.
Okay. So at what age did you think you decided to be a teacher?
Probably, it was somewhere between like the senior year of high school and the first couple of years of college. I'd always been looking, I worked for the local vet for 5 years, always thought about veterinary medicine. Pretty confident I could have gotten into vet school and gotten through. But something drove me towards the education end of it.
Sure.
I had a good relationship with a lot of teachers that I had and wanted to be somebody who could provide those opportunities and those experiences for others.
Sure.
And so,
Okay.
not unsatisfied with the choice. I've had a very good career,
Yeah.
been very happy with it.
Okay. So when I look at somebody like yourself, you've touched a lot of kids doing a lot of different things. And
Hopefully.
really, if you look across the spectrum of teachers over the years you've been there, I can't imagine there's been, say, many, if any, that have touched that many different kids. Good basketball coach, good football coach, but you've done baseball, you've done football, you've done theater, and you've taught science. So most kids that have gone through those schools in all those years have seen you.
There was a few years where I was doing football, theater, student council, and all the teaching.
Right.
So it's probably just nobody's as crazy as I am or as dumb as I am. I'm not sure. But
Just followed it and away it went.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm finally learning how to say no to a few things.
Okay. And what are the plans going forward? So you're stepping out of the theater a little bit.
Yep. So this year it was decided we'd step out of theater and student leadership. I thought I would go 1 more year, but the year started up and it's like, no, I don't think this is the right move for me. It was, had a good run. Things were really running self-sufficient. We had really built up some nice programs, and the pandemic hit,
Right.
as with everybody else.
Yeah.
And it really took down the programs a little bit.
Okay.
That in high school, your institutional memory is like a year or 2.
Right. So you missed that.
So you missed that. So in student council, that was a big deal because we didn't have kids coming in knowing what was happening. In theater, we sort of lost our parent support group, which was really critical.
Okay. Sure.
And it became a heavy lift it became frustrating to try to rebuild all that.
Sure.
After you had spent all that time.
Just getting it to
Put it
run
together.
normally on its own.
And it wasn't, the kids were great. It wasn't the kids' fault. It was just, it's like, this is a good opportunity for me to step out and let somebody else have their way with it and do it their way.
Sure. Okay. Glad to have you here at Channel 6. Fascinating to see somebody like yourself still have a lot of vigor in your voice after all the years.
I hope so.
You know?
I think so. But,
So let's look forward and say, if you said 2, 3, 4 years down the road, if you're not teaching, what do you think the next step will be for you?
That's the $1,000,000 question. I don't know. 100%. I mean, I know I'll still want to do something. I'm not just going to sit.
Sure.
I like something where I don't have to have a lesson plan done every night.
Right.
And
For
make
4
sure that I got
years,
things
right.
organized for 90
Sure.
to 100 kids every day.
Yep.
That gets
Now,
very time consuming. But I mean, I've just explored a few things, not in any serious detail yet. Like, the Belle Isle Nature Center was looking for a coordinator for the Nature
Okay.
Center. The Detroit Zoo was looking for an educator director. So
There's
something
things out
that's,
there.
yeah, that's not say a classroom teacher, but more of an informal education position type thing.
sure.
Or I'm not opposed to just going into Home Depot and being a greeter.
There you go. Okay, closer to home, right?
Yeah.
Now, with all those activities that you've done, I can't imagine you have a lot of hobbies, because there's probably no time for hobbies.
Yeah, the only thing that might be a hobby is I run quite often,
Okay.
but just for my own health.
Health and-
I'll do a race, but I'm not racing.
Okay, right.
know.
Not racing time-wise.
Yeah, and still I like to travel.
Okay.
I like going around and traveling. I do a lot of work with, been doing a lot of work for a number of years with some of the major national groups in biology. So someone called the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, I do a lot of work for. The College Board, which does the SATs and the AP courses, I've done work for.
Now, the Howard Hughes, explain that a little bit.
Howard Hughes Medical Institute is in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
They are the largest private funder of research in the world.
Okay.
Fortunately, about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, they decided to create an educational branch and started funding development of educational resources.
Okay.
And I just happened to make a connection. I went to a workshop in Colorado 12 years ago, just lucky enough to make a connection with one of the women who was running that program
Sure.
as it was just about to sort of take off. And so I've been doing a lot of training for teachers, a lot of workshops at national conferences, promoting their materials, because all the materials are free. They're all based on primary literature. They're top quality stuff. I've helped develop some of the materials. It's, perfect for public schools. It doesn't cost a cent.
Sure.
And they're really high quality resources.
What I'm amazed by is that how many nonprofits and foundations there are in this world that operate in these little, I'll call them little silos of whatever their mode of funding is for, of how many different opportunities there are for different grants,
Right.
and different things like that for communities like our own.
Nope, this is a great organization, and I'm glad they've decided to enter the world of education, because they've made a big difference.
Yeah.
And you would be hard pressed to go to most life science classrooms, biology classrooms around the country, and not see somebody using
Something
resources
from
from them.
there. Yeah. It's like when you watch something on Channel 56, PBS, and you watch. Now, I'm the goofball that watches the end of the credits to see
Gotcha.
brought to you by,
Uh-huh.
some of these foundations, and the work that they do is astounding.
Yeah.
When you look at, it's like, I don't know if you've noticed lately, but the Ralph Wilson Foundation.
Oh yeah, huge.
Okay.
All over Detroit.
Yeah, and Ralph Wilson was what he's famous for. He's the owner of the Buffalo Bills.
Right.
But his business was insurance, and the gentleman amassed a fortune that was huge, and he left it to his own foundation to not be used into perpetuity, but to be spent down over, I can't remember the amount of years,
Yeah,
but it's
I
like
don't
20
either,
or 30
but-
years. Which means that most foundations typically, and I'm not an expert on it, but typically will go into perpetuity, meaning forever. They
Right.
want to keep their endowment and look at their budget so they never spend down so much. But the Wilson Foundation is going to be spent down in, I think, 20 or 30 years. And you're seeing like nature trails and parks.
The whole
all over
really
Metro.
contributing to the expansion of the riverfront in Detroit.
And so the Ralph Wilson Foundation, I know that he earmarked money towards Buffalo, where he had business, and Metro Detroit, where he had business.
He's a native Detroiter.
Yeah. So it's fascinating to see that stuff. And I think I read somewhere there's some foundations, or I should say groups locally here, St. Clair, East China, Marine City, St. Clair, Marysville, they're putting in for grants from that foundation.
Oh, are they? Yeah. I know it was spreading a little further than Detroit. I just wasn't sure how far.
Yeah, so very interesting. And there's all kinds of little nuggets all over. Like I said, when I watch PBS and see these foundations that put things on, very good for children, very good for education and community.
Right.
So
there's still some of those old timers out there. The Kresge Foundation, the Ford Foundation. There's a lot of those.
So appreciate you coming by today and enlightening us to what you've been doing for all these years.
Sure.
And we look forward to seeing you in the community.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Craig.
Have a great day.
You